Hello and welcome. My name is Jeff Roberts and I'll be your host for this edition of Time for a Slow Burn. This program is a monthly event and we will discuss topics of interest to the southeastern corner of Wisconsin, the state, and of course nationally. Topics can be just about anything. Usually something that starts off as a discussion, a debate, or just a plain old-fashioned yelling match between friends and neighbors. Surprising what can get a person all riled up. Sadly, it's usually something about local or national politics, television program, or something we've witnessed firsthand. And sometimes it's just a rumor. For our first topic, the current seated president will leave a legacy that can only be described as horrible. He is not worthy to be titled the former president of the United States when he does leave office. His legacy should be ever written as the president who lied to America during not only the campaigns, but all the way through his presidency, all the way to the last day in office, about his signature health care and how much it cost and where the money would come from. The real answer to that question is the middle-class working Americans. He lied to the American people about the loss of U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens during the attack on the embassy annex located in Benghazi, Libya. He and his mouthpiece, Susan Rice, claimed it was all about a video. What a travesty that was. Mr. President, you have used tragedies like the Sandy Hook school shooting and all of the horrific shooting incidents to push for your gun control agenda. Instead of going after the criminals who committed these acts, instead you focus your energies on the tool they used. Once again, you have lied to America, and the American people swallowed your BS, hook, line, and sinker. But not anymore. When that didn't work, you tried to use the UN Small Arms Treaty to do the dirty work for you. Thankfully, the Senate must approve such BS treaties, and they didn't. The UN treaty was soundly defeated by both sides of the political aisle. It was just another attempt by you and your brain jackass party to disarm America and ignore the rule of law. Mr. President, you attempted to do this because you don't like the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. Well, too bad. You don't get to change the laws or circumvent Congress because you don't like a law or a right that was granted by the Bill of Rights and our Constitution. You have claimed repeatedly you are not attempting to disarm any American citizens, and in a way you're correct. Just not the way you wish. You have been America's top gun salesman since you first took office. Once the dust settled on the first election, Americans took it to heart that you're a gun control freak and gun sales have gone through the roof. Thankfully, the sales of firearms is still at record levels. But that didn't stop you, did it? So then you tried to use the Environmental Protection Agency to do the work for you, and you failed at that one too. Once again, you lied about the intent of the policies you were pushing. So the pen is not mightier than the sword. You can't personally stop America and America's right to keep and bear arms. The EPA can't stop America and Americans' right to keep and bear arms. You lied about the intent of the so-called executive orders, and now the U.S. Supreme Court has recently ruled you've overstepped your authority and are rolling back some of those executive orders. Now, Mr. President, here's an FYI for you. One of the things that make America great is our ability to elect new leaders. Your days as President of the United States are drawing to a close. You served almost 2 full terms, and come January, it's time to move on. Your presidency has been a farce. You offered hope and change and only provided more partisan politics and dirty deals done dirt cheap behind closed doors. You may think you're the smartest guy in the room, but your behavior in high school, then in college, and as a guest lecturer at universities have proven otherwise. You couldn't hack finding a real job after college, so you became a community organizer, whatever the hell that is. That didn't work out very well either, did it? Sadly, you're just another brain jackass taking suckle from the American government teat. Another freeloader who has accomplished nothing but claims credit for everything. Thankfully, January 2017 will arrive and you will get the boot from the White House. Your popularity has fallen flat, just like your domestic and foreign policies have. You rode that popularity from the elections all the way into the White House. Now comes the long, slow crawl back, the one back down to earth. For our next topic, I thought it'd be a good idea to take a look at this bunch, especially since we've had a lot of BS floating around in the media about ISIS, and a lot lately. Some of it was good journalism, some of it was just plain crap. ISIS is a combination of fools and extremists who use religion as a crutch to do all the things they can to harm others. Anyone becomes a target at any time. Sadly, no one knows who the next victim can or will be. They are chosen by those who think they have the power to control life and death on earth. They do not do everything for their religion. Instead, they spew out their horrific message in hopes of scaring everyone into letting them do what they want anyway. It's difficult to pin down what ISIS really wants. Now, I've been following the security briefings and chasing down as much information as I could given my limited resources, but it's never enough. So I will let Tom Johnson from the Defense of Democracies Institute the chance to tell you what ISIS actually is. Here's Tom.
It seems that hardly a day goes by in which the Islamic State, also known as ISIS or ISIL, doesn't appear in a newspaper or on a TV news screen. And the news is always bad. Hideous death and wanton destruction of a type rarely seen in modern history. So what is the Islamic State? Where did it come from? What does it want? And why? Let's try to answer these questions in turn. First, ISIS is the illegitimate child of Saddam Hussein's regime and Al-Qaeda. Saddam's former military and intelligence officers hold many of ISIS's most senior positions and have overseen the group's rise to prominence. In 2002 and early 2003, some Al-Qaeda members relocated from Afghanistan to Iraq, where they prepared to fight the Americans, who toppled Saddam Hussein's regime in March 2003. These jihadists became known as Al-Qaeda in Iraq when their leader, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, swore his allegiance to Osama bin Laden in 2004. Zarqawi, a murderous psychopath, was finally killed by U.S. and Iraqi forces in June 2006. Following his death, Al-Qaeda in Iraq was rebranded as the Islamic State of Iraq. In 2010, a new leader took control of the group, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Taking advantage of the power vacuum left by the complete U.S. withdrawal from Iraq in 2011 and the Syrian civil war that began that same year, Baghdadi and his lieutenants greatly expanded the size and scope of the organization. At first, Baghdadi was loyal to al-Qaeda's senior leadership, but in 2013 he defied orders from his superiors and declared that his group was now the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or Levant, known by its acronyms ISIS and ISIL. It's worth noting that ISIS continues to market Osama bin Laden's endorsement of them to this day. What does ISIS want and why? ISIS is attempting to resurrect an empire similar to those that arose in Islam's early history. These empires were referred to as caliphates and led by a caliph, the Muslims' chief ruler, also known as the Emir of the Faithful. This is, in fact, how Baghdadi's followers now refer to him. ISIS relies on a rich Islamic mythology, with citations from Islamic texts, to justify its actions and portray itself as the true heirs of Muhammad. Their propaganda videos use Islam's early history to frame their actions as part of an ongoing conflict with the Crusaders. ISIS's leaders want their followers to believe they are fighting as part of the same religious war. When ISIS's Libyan branch executed 21 Egyptian Coptic Christians in 2015, ISIS advertised the slayings in a video titled, "A Message Signed with Blood to the Nation of the Cross." The Nation of the Cross, of course, meaning Christians. That's why on Libya's Mediterranean shores, the lead executioner of the Egyptian Coptic Christians pointed his knife in the direction of Italy and promised to conquer Rome, the symbolic seat of Christendom. Despite seeking to spark an interfaith war, however, most of ISIS's victims are Muslims, especially Shiite Muslims for whom ISIS, which is Sunni Muslim, harbors a special animosity. ISIS claims that any Muslim who does not swear bay'ah, an oath of allegiance, to Baghdadi is an infidel or an apostate. Even ISIS's rival jihadists in Al-Qaeda are considered apostates because they refuse to genuflect to Baghdadi. In November 2014, Baghdadi announced that his caliphate had expanded into several areas outside of Iraq and Syria. Baghdadi's people set up provinces everywhere from West and North Africa to the Arabian Peninsula to South Asia. ISIS argues that Muslims owe these provinces their loyalty. Most of these provinces control little territory, but they have become prolific killers. Just over 1 year after Baghdadi's announcement, the Islamic State's provinces had already engaged in hundreds of terrorist attacks. On October 31, 2015, for example, the Islamic State's province in Sinai brought down a Russian airliner, killing all 224 people on board. In sum, ISIS is attempting to become a permanent totalitarian state, inspired by the caliphates of Islam's first decades. From this base, they will spread their ideology to the rest of the world. Anyone who stands in the way is marked for death. But ISIS's caliphate claim rests on its ability to control territory. This is both its strength and Achilles' heel. Should it lose significant ground in Iraq and Syria, its caliphate claim will become tenuous, severely damaging its legitimacy in the eyes of many Muslims. How this might happen is a key question for the United States, Europe, Asia, and many in the Arab world. But this much we know: it will take much more than airstrikes. I'm Tom Jocelyn of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies for Prager University.
Take my hand and start a brand new day, and together as one we'll start to see some change.
Underneath everything we are, underneath everything we do, we are all people, connected, interdependent, united. And when we reach out a hand to one, we can influence the condition of all. That's what it means to live united.
Welcome back. Our next topic has been covered to the point of ad nauseum. However, we still don't get it. Well, some don't. It's time to throw out the undergraduate studies on how great socialism is and face facts. Socialism stinks, and it's failed at every effort to start up and in every country that uses it as an economic system. It's a failure of an economic system. Epic failure. I don't think the point can be stressed enough, and here's why I say that. The difference between socialism and communism is that socialism is a common community and everything is done for the common community. Communism, on the other hand, everything is done for the state and for the party. Nearly all of Central America is socialist. Yeah. They have among the worst economies on earth. Poor health care, terrible monetary systems that are bankrupt or nearly bankrupt. The education system in Central America is also at the bottom of the world rankings, yet we still have many in the U.S. who believe socialism is the right system for us. Time to get your heads out of that cloud of wacky tobacco you've been smoking and grow up. This is not the 1960s. Not everyone is willing to live in a common community where one size fits all for food. Work is assigned to you based on your so-called talents, not interest. Where you can do nothing and still get fed, clothed, and receive the same tax bill as everyone else. And it will be high. It has to be in order to pay for all those entitlements and benefits provided by a socialist government. Well, if you don't believe me, just take a listen to what happened when America first tried socialism. Yes, dear friends, we tried it and found out the hard way we didn't like it. Why would we like it now? Why would it work now? Oh, I don't know, because the socialist-in-chief of America, Bernie Sanders, says it's good for you? He will give you free stuff. But wait, who will pay for all that free stuff? That is the question you should be asking about now. The answer, according to Bernie, the rich will pay for everything. Wait a minute. Let's stop and think. If you tax the rich too much, they're not rich anymore. So who's going to pay for all the free stuff then? Well, here to explain why socialism was a bad idea when America was first settled in 1607 is Larry Swigart of Dayton University. Larry has a pretty compelling tale to tell. So here's Larry.
Americans didn't invent free market capitalism, but you might say they perfected it. In doing so, they created more wealth for more people than any society in the history of the world. To begin to understand this fascinating and complex story, we have to travel back in time to the very first settlers of America. But before we get to the history, let me define what I mean by capitalism. It's not an easy term to pin down because it developed over thousands of years of human interaction. Adam Smith, the great English thinker, first described it in his famous 1776 treatise, The Wealth of Nations, but he didn't invent it. For our purposes here, I define capitalism as an economic system in which individuals freely decide what they will produce and who they will serve. Since both parties have to consent, it's a system in which success demands that you serve the needs of others before you are rewarded for your work. Now back to history. When the first settlers arrived at Jamestown in 1607, then Plymouth in 1620, they were operating under an economic system common to all European nations at that time known as mercantilism. Under mercantilism, businesses, especially in the colonies, were operated for the benefit of the state. While governments permitted the companies to make profits, their primary purpose was to advance the national interest of England or Spain or France. The early American settlements were set up to be self-sufficient, so that the English government didn't have to support them. And they had to stake out territory. That was key to the colonial game. If England held the territory, Spain and France didn't. The early colonists began their adventure with what they thought was a beautiful idea. They set up a common storehouse of grain from which people were supposed to take what they needed and put back what they could. Lands were also held in common and were worked in common. The settlers owned no land of their own. Though there was no name for this system, it was an ideal socialist commune. And you can probably guess what happened. It began to fall apart almost immediately. As the colonists learned, when everyone is entitled to everything, no one's responsible for anything. A colonist who started his workday early or stayed late received the same provision of food as a colonist who showed up late, went home early, or didn't work at all. After about 2 years, the settlement was reduced to eating shoelaces and rats. Half of them died of starvation. Captain John Smith, of Pocahontas fame, took control of the colony and scrapped the socialist model. Each colonist received his own parcel of land. Private property had come to the New World. He who won't work won't eat, Smith told them, citing the biblical admonition. Well, they worked and they ate, and the colony was saved. The same story unfolded further north, in the Plymouth colony 10 years later. Although this was a Puritan colony with religious goals, its plan was the same as Jamestown's, and it also failed. As its young governor, William Bradford, noted, by adopting the communal system, we thought we were wiser than God. So they quickly abandoned the commune for private ownership. Soon they had an abundance, which they celebrated with a holiday we now know as Thanksgiving. Over the next 150 years, this hard-learned lesson that men should be responsible for their own economic fate became conventional wisdom in the colonies. The American Revolution was largely fought over the burden that British mercantilism placed on the colonies. Two unpopular taxes, the Stamp Act and the Tea Act, are well-known examples. The Americans saw the British government regulating and controlling almost all of their economic activities and didn't like it. Now, it's true that even after gaining independence, none of the founders could be called capitalists. The idea of capitalism as a description of an economic system was only just beginning to be discussed in America. Yet many of the most influential founders intuitively gravitated toward free market principles. Thomas Jefferson's ideas of private land ownership shaped the famous Land Ordinance of 1785 that made public land available to private citizens. While Alexander Hamilton's concepts of individual responsibility and sanctity of contracts could be seen in the Panic of 1791-92, in which he steadfastly refused to allow the U.S. government to bail out bankers who had triggered the panic. Benjamin Franklin, of course, had practiced capitalism all his life with his printing business and with his maxims in Poor Richard's Almanac. The Constitution itself is awash in core concepts of a free market, sanctity of contracts, freedom of expression, powerful limits on the government's ability to regulate or tax, an emphasis on paying debts, and so on. In short, it was the wisdom of experience, not academic ideology, that created America's free market principles. The result has been the most prosperous and free nation in the history of the world. I'm Larry Swikart of the University of Dayton for Prager University.
In America, we are free to have opposing viewpoints, to enjoy a good old-fashioned debate on politics, economics, and just about any other topic we deem important. We have a huge library of topics to debate, discuss, make decisions on almost every day. Sometimes we can make very clear decisions on what is important to us, and other times, well, not so much. But the point is, we have choices. We can decide. We do not live in a system that squashes our capability to decide or to make laws against whether or not we can have a differing viewpoint than someone else. Or do we? Lately, we've seen and heard a lot in the media outlets that there's some who wish to curtail the freedom of expressing our own viewpoint if it differs from that of the ruling elite, especially when it comes to climate change or similar environmental topics of interest. Some liberals want to censor any adverse or opposing comments on these subjects because they can't control the outcome. Don't you realize the science is settled? Can't you see what's happening? The bringers of doom have had their fun now for decades. And still, the coastal cities have not been flooded by the ocean. I remember an idiot who was a climatologist back in 1974 who cried wolf whenever the world would not listen. He emphatically stated Florida would be under 10 feet of water by 2001, all due to climate change and man's ever-expanding carbon footprint. It's 2016, and it hasn't happened yet, nor will it in the near future. I also remember back to the 1960s when several morons claimed we would enter an ice age because our pollution of the air and ozone would disappear completely by the year 2010. That was 2000. Wait a minute. What? Their AccuDart system of prediction didn't work then. Why would it work now? All of these so-called experts don't have a clue and don't want one either. They just make bold but inaccurate predictions that have no chance whatsoever of becoming a reality. But they make them because they can. No one tried to stop them or censor them, and science was certainly not settled just because they said so, or because they were proclaimed to be experts. No, they were nothing more than blowhards who craved attention. Sensationalism was the key to their fame, and in the end, they were all discredited and ridiculed. But that hasn't stopped the new crop of knuckleheads. However, the approach has changed just a bit. They learned the valuable lessons of history. Push the predictions out far enough and no one will be around to care who said what, and who knows, you just may get one of them right for a change. So that begs the question, do you believe in all this ruckus? Is it true, or is it just more rhetorical nonsense from junk scientists? Or so-called scientists. Are these so-called experts just trying to sell you more green products that cost twice as much and do not function as intended? Who are you, a believer or a non-believer? A liberal or a conservative? Are you a pragmatist or an ideologue? Do you believe in a settled science or an opposing viewpoint? That has been the questions for decades, and we are no closer to the answer than we were when these questions were first proposed. Well, especially in the past 8 or so years. We still have no idea who's right or who's wrong yet, and for good reason. But I will let our next guest lecturer tell us why this is true. So here is Jonah Goldberg, a columnist for several major media outlets, and he has some interesting thoughts on this particular subject. So ask yourself, do you believe?
One of the staple arguments of American liberals, from Presidents Woodrow Wilson to Bill Clinton, from education reformer John Dewey to New York Times columnist Tom Friedman, is that they don't believe in labels. Liberals are pragmatists and realists and empiricists. They only care about what works. Conservatives, meanwhile, are ideologues or extremists or dogmatists or just plain lunatics who are blinded by ideology. Here's what President Barack Obama said on the subject. What is required is a new Declaration of Independence, not just in our nation, but in our own lives, from ideology and small thinking, prejudice and bigotry. Did you catch that? If you have an ideology, you belong amongst the bigots and the mentally confused. Once you start paying attention, you'll hear variations on this claim all over the place. In truth, it is a very old technique, pioneered by none other than Napoleon Bonaparte, who sought to demonize his critics as mesmerized theorists enthralled to an ideology while he put the needs of the nation above all considerations. Marx picked up the technique, arguing that only the people who agreed with him were free of mind-warping ideology. The desirability and inevitability of socialism was to them a scientific fact, and therefore anyone who disagrees with scientific fact must be, in effect, brainwashed. In the 20th century, the American progressives offered their own version of the same idea. They created a whole philosophical school, pragmatism, which as a matter of principle rejected philosophical principles. William James, the most important founder of pragmatism, argued that we should measure ideas not by whether they're right or wrong, but by whether they work. Ideas are right if they have cash value, according to James. Herbert Crowley, the founder of the New Republic, responding to the criticism that his liberal magazine was too pro-Mussolini, whose ideas seemed to be working in Italy at the time, said it well. If there are any abstract liberal principles, we do not know how to formulate them. Nor, if they are formulated by others, do we recognize their authority. Liberalism, as we understand it, is an activity. Contemporary American liberalism has inherited this pose. It is certain it knows what works. Liberalism. And what is liberalism? What liberals do. It's an activity. And they denigrate opposing viewpoints not as competing ideas or positions, but as the products of a warped ideological worldview. How often do you hear people say, I don't believe in labels? Whether it's liberal politicians, TV news anchors, columnists, cable news hosts, or your brother-in-law Harry, the line always goes something like this. Why can't we move beyond these partisan labels? Why can't we get beyond this philosophical divide and get to the hard work of dealing with the problems facing the American people? Warning. People only say these things when they want you to shut up and get with their program. What you never hear them say is, we need to move beyond these partisan labels. We need to get beyond the philosophical divide. And for that reason, I'm going to abandon all of my principles and agree with you. Look, I'm not saying that liberal ideological positions are wrong. That's another discussion. My point is that liberals are wrong when they say they don't have ideological principles in the first place. Moreover, there's nothing wrong with having ideological principles. To say that you have ideological principles isn't really all that different from saying that you simply have principles. Like with anything else, there are good ideologies and bad ideologies. Good ideas, bad ideas. Think of ideology as a checklist of your priorities, your first principles. Do you consider economic freedom important or trivial? Is the right to life fundamental or frivolous? Is private property a more valuable principle than economic redistribution? These are all ideological questions, and asking them doesn't make you closed-minded, it makes you more serious-minded. There is no unideological answer to these questions. On abortion, for example, if you come down on the pro-life side, you're being ideological, and if you come down on the pro-choice side, you're still being ideological. The difference is that people who take their principles seriously understand that they have principles. And when they string them together, they have an ideology. It is the people who constantly reject rigorous thinking because they are afraid to be led beyond their easy instincts who are closed-minded. The fear of hypocrisy, of judging people, of making hard choices on principle. This is the fear of ideology that causes people to retreat into relativism or nihilism or what we might here call no-labelism. As G.K. Chesterton wrote, trees have no dogmas and turnips are singularly broad-minded. In terms of ideology, serious people should aspire to be more than a tree or a turnip. I'm Jonah Goldberg for Prager University.
Take my hand and start a brand new day. And together as one we'll start to see some change.
Underneath everything we are, underneath everything we do, we are all people, connected, interdependent, united. And when we reach out a hand to one, we can influence the condition of all. That's what it means to live united.
Are you camera shy but would like to get behind the scenes of the fun-filled world of television production? Then Kenosha TV just might be the place for you. Every week, your friends and neighbors on Kenosha TV create new programs. We always need people like you to help direct the shows, man the cameras, tweak the audio, and have a great time in producing programming for Kenosha viewers. No experience is necessary. Kenosha TV provides the training and equipment for you. For more information, give us a call or go to our website.
Welcome back. Well, that's it for another edition of Time for a Slow Burn. Tune in next time for topics of interest that tend to burn your hide. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.